either chapter 1, 2, 3, or 4. I've got all my classes on here now, and if I'm correct, my face-to-face class is taking the test this Tuesday, and then my online is taking it on 9/23. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. So my 9. Then I will start with, let's see. Let me see what homework they have. Okay. Okay, for the exam, all right, let me go back in. And
Yes.
okay, so here's the checklist. This is not an exact complete checklist. This is really talking about the final, but it's the same information that's covered. So for chapter 1, make sure you know the difference between a good and a bad. Like a good is something that brings you positive utility, while the bad is the negative utility. Know all the 4 types of resources, land, labor, capital, and know the difference between them. I believe there in the book there was something that was like, hold on, what was it? There were questions about which one things were, I believe, I'm trying to remember how it was worded, but it was something to the effect of, in homework 1, something was land, labor, capital, or entrepreneurship. No, for the exam, the definition of cerebus paribus. Make sure that you understand when you're talking about cerebus paribus, you are talking specifically about one thing changing, everything else remaining the same. Cerebus paribus has nothing to do with resources. It has nothing to do with cost or profit. Cerebus paribus is just one thing has changed, everything else remains exactly the same. So in chapter 3, when you start to do it, and it gives you these scenarios about an ice cream truck and the cost of ice cream has gone down, what would suppliers do? It is just asking you, based on that, what would suppliers do? And nothing else. So cerebus paribus. With theory and abstraction, understand that theories and abstractions, these models are coming from, the real world is very, very complicated. Right? And if it's very, very complicated, And in order to model it, you have to come up with some assumptions. So in, for example, the PPF curves, production possibility frontiers curves, that assumes there are only two goods in an economy. Now, we already know there are millions of goods in an economy, but in order to model or to come up with a graph of something, you have to like say, okay, we're going to assume this, there's only two goods. Or when you're studying, when in the very first model about the flow diagram between families and households and businesses, if you notice, we're, people are giving businesses money, businesses are giving people goods and services. There's no mention of the government, all right? So when you have a model, you've got to come up with some assumptions there. Know the difference between positive and normative statements. A positive statement is a statement of fact. You can prove it, right? People die if they do not wear their seatbelts. Smoking causes cancer. Positive statement is just something that is said. It's sort of describing the world as it is. Normative statement, on the other hand, and I always like to remember this, it's normal to judge people, is a statement of judgment. The government ought to do this. We need help, etc. Know the difference between micro and macro. Like Dr. K really likes to ask questions about this. So on the exam and their public practice questions, macro is the economy as a whole. Microeconomics is really talking specifically about individual choices and business choices, right? Make sure you know when you're looking at a graph what a positive line is and what a negative line is. Positive slopes upward. All right, hold on. Does somebody need me to mute somebody? I will mute. Hold on one second. Okay, I'm putting everybody on mute. All right, so know the difference between a positive and a negative statement. Excuse me. Know a positive slope would be an upward sloping, for example. On this axis, we always have price. And guys, the easiest thing for you to do on this exam is to make sure you draw out everyone. So if you are sitting there right now, might as well draw it out on your notes. Make sure for the exam you have a piece of paper and a pen. I cannot stress that enough to you. So you'll have a supply curve that's upward sloping. You'll have a demand curve that's downward sloping. All right, and let's say this is the demand for tennis shoes. And we get an article comes out and it says that tennis shoes, wearing tennis shoes adds another 10 years to your life. What's going to happen to the supply curve? I want you to then go to your list of the things that move the supply curve, the determinants of the supply. You find all of those in chapter 4. Find out, is there any mention about this? You're like, no, right? If that article comes out and says that tennis shoes improve your life, it's going to change the demand curve. It's going to increase the demand. That's a determinant of demand. So it's going to shift the demand curve to the right. The demand curve will switch over to the right. And so we had our original demand curve, D. We'll have our new demand curve, D sub 1. And we'll have our original equilibrium and our new equilibrium, E sub 1. And if you notice, because demand increased and suppliers didn't do anything, even though this article came out and said that tennis shoes, increase your life, suppliers did absolutely nothing because they don't do anything. They might supply more shoes because the price used to be, let's say, $10 a pair. And now the new price is, let's say, $12 a pair. So here, it'd be a change in quantity supplied. All right, meaning we slid up the supply curve, a movement along the curve. But for demand, it's not a change in quantity demanded. The demand curve actually shifted over. So that's a change in demand, which caused the price to go up, which caused basically a change in quantity supplied. All right, anybody have surely you have to have a question about that. Does anybody have a question about that? Anyone not understand what I did just now? All right, that was chapter 3. I kind of jumped the gun there. All right, so make sure you know the positive relationships. Supply, oh, hold on, I'm not sharing. New share. All right, so chapter 1. Anyone have any questions about chapter 1? Or any questions about the homework on chapter 1? Okay, we're going to move on to PPF. For the PPF curve, make sure you understand those general assumptions again. This is a market demand curve. Let me clear this, clear all drawing. PPF curve looks like this. I'm sorry, and we're going to have two goods. We're going to have a good A, whatever that happens to be. Let's say apples and bananas. All right. A PPF curve can either be a straight line, which is not a straight line, sorry. All right, let me see if I can find my pen, which is constant returns, or it can be bowed out. If it is bowed out, looks more like a curved line, then it's going to be increasing opportunity cost. I don't have my pen on me, so I can't draw this out clearly. If you are inside of the curve, and let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. See if I can find a good example of one. And guys, in my online class, you can't see these reviews as of yet, simply because they're not posted. But you will have access to them before the exam. I just haven't loaded them up yet. So if we go to this problem here, this is an increasing opportunity cost. Notice the curve is kind of crooked. The reason it's increasing opportunity cost, and truly, and to be honest with you, a PPF curve can look like this, or it can look like this, a straight line. But this is not very realistic. When it is a straight line, it's saying that whatever resources it takes to make coffee, those can be interchanged easily to make corn. All right, and this actually has a slope here of -2 because you've got the y, 10 minus 0 over 5 minus 0, so 10 over 5 is 2, -2. This is a negative slope. It's a trade-off. This is constant returns. For every single one coffee you give up or you make, right? If I go from A to B, I'm going to gain 1 bushel of coffee. But when I go from 1 to 2, I used to have 8 bushels of corn. Now I'm going to have 6. So for every 1 coffee I gain, I'm going to lose 2, assuming I am on the curve, if I'm at A, B, C, or D. If I were right here at this point here, which is not really a point, if I made 1 coffee and 4 corn, for me to move from inside of the PPF curve to the curve itself, if you notice here I have 1 coffee, 4 corn. Here I have 1 coffee, 8 corn. If you are inside the PPF curve and you move to a point on the PPF curve, you don't lose anything, which is sort of weird because we always talk about the PPF curve being a trade-off. You know, you gain one, you lose these. When you are inside the PPF curve, you can get to the PPF curve without giving up anything, any of your goods. Here we had 1 coffee. Here we had 4 corn. At point A, we have 1 coffee. We have 8 corn. And the reason that is because inside the PPF curve, you are being inefficient. You have enough to make 1 coffee and 8 corn, but you choose not to. All right, so we say inside the PPF curve would be an example of unemployment. You're not using all of your resources. It's an example of letting capital, and remember for this exam, capital is never, never, ever money. All right, here you are not using all of your resources and you have them sitting around. So if I move down to here, let me ask y'all this question. Movement between which of the following points represents an increase in economic efficiency? Right? When you move from A to C, have you become more efficient or less efficient? And I know you can't answer, but I'll give you like 2 seconds to think about it. I'm moving from point A to point C. I used to be efficient, now I'm inefficient. So it can't be A to C because it's looking to see which one is actually efficiency. When you move from C to D, here at C, I had 150 grain, and so on my exam, I'd write down 150 grain, I'd write down 100 cars. Here at point D, I have 350 grain, and I have 150 cars. using the same land, labor, and capital, the same resources. This is where you used to be. This is where you are now. That is efficiency. Because you're using the same amount of stuff, or you have the same amount of stuff, but here, let's say you're only using half your equipment and half your people. Right? They're just sitting around literally shirking, not doing anything. So we would say moving from C to D would be efficiency. Now moving from D to B, if you notice, A to C and D to B, A to C and D to B are basically the same thing. You're coming inside the curve. So if you think about it on an exam, like, does that make sense? There's no difference between A and C and D and B. They're both in the same direction. A to B, same direction, right? And then A to D. What's interesting about A to D, it's different than those other answers. However, when you are at A, you are efficient. When you are at D, you are efficient. But in order to get from A to D, I'm going to go from 150 grain to 350 grain. All right, that's great. I'm going to get more grain. But in getting more grain, I had to lose some corn. Here I had 350 corn. At point D, I have 150 corn, so I've lost something. That's called trade-off. So when you are on the PPF curve, that's an example of trade-off. When you are inside the PPF curve and you move to the PPF curve, that is an example of becoming more efficient. Coming off the PPF curve inside, inefficient. So again, when you are inside the PPF curve and you move to the curve, you can move to the curve without losing anything. You are literally gaining. When we went from C to A, here we have the same number of grain. Here we only used to make 100 cars, excuse me. Now we're making 350 cars, all right? Inside to the curve, you gain without losing anything. When you are on the curve, all these points are exactly the same. Remember, A is no better than D according to the book. A is the same thing as D. You just want to be on the curve to be efficient. All right, so the 3 points are inside the curve, on the curve, and outside the curve. And I didn't really talk about outside the curve. Chapter 2 starts off with outside the curve is not possible, not feasible, but then you find out later on, hey, it actually is feasible. And there's a problem that I sent out in announcements where I worked out the chapter 2, number 7, which was a PPF problem. Make sure for the exam you know how to get opportunity cost. Make sure for the exam you know how to pick absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Know the difference between the two. Absolute advantage just means that I can produce more stuff than you. So I can have an absolute advantage in either one good, or I can have an absolute advantage in 2 goods. If I have an absolute advantage in 2 goods, here's what our PPF curves are going to look like. All right, we're going to have axes. We have 2 goods. This will be your PPF curve. And this would be my PPF curve. All right. I would just have my PPF curve would be further out, an absolute advantage. But you may have a comparative advantage to me, and I won't know that until I get the opportunity cost and find out who has a lower opportunity cost. Explain the cause of increasing opportunity cost. Make sure you know this for the exam. We have increasing opportunity cost simply because resources are not that flexible. The same resources it takes to make haircuts are not the same resources it takes to make apple pie. Therefore, when you're transferring them between each other because they're so specialized and so specific, you're going to lose something. The more you have of something, the less you're going to get of it. Explain what would cause an inward shift of the PPF and outward shift, and when both or only one resources change. Let me clear this. Let's assume, and you know what, let me get my pen real quickly. Okay, let's assume we have 2 goods. I have cars, like motor cars, and I have some sort of fruit, whatever the fruit may be. All right, let's see, did it catch? All right, yeah. All right, so if I have 2 goods, cars and fruit. On this axis, I have cars. And here I have fruit. All right. This is constant opportunity cost. And let's say, for me, let's say this is 5 cars. If we did nothing all day, we could make 5 cars. If we did, this point says right here, at this point here, I'm making 5 cars, we're making literally 0 fruit. Here, we are picking, let's say, 1,000 fruit. Actually, let's just say 100 fruit. So for every car I give up, I'm giving up basically 20 pieces of fruit. If something were to change here, for example, let's say we got more people. If we got more people in the economy, both of these PPF curves would ideally shift out. We could produce more stuff. If, however, we ended up only getting like more fertilizer, fertilizer in this economy is not going to affect cars, but what it would do is possibly just change our fruit. So we'd stick with 5 cars. And fruit may go out here. So make sure you understand when the PPF will shift to the right, whenever there's an increase in technology, an increase in immigration, an increase in resources, and when the PPF curve would shift inward. Natural disaster, right? Think about Louisiana. Think about all the stuff they used to produce. They used to produce X cars and how much fruit they used to produce every year. And now with all this rain and natural disaster, their PPF curve, they're going to be producing less stuff, right? Also, make sure you watch the videos in the book about PPF. All right, we talked about productive, efficient, economic growth. I don't think I made that clear. But when I'm discussing economic growth is when this PPF curve shifts out. The PPF curve has to move. When you move from this point here, A, to this point here, B, that's not economic growth. You're just changing what you're making. Any movement along a PPF curve is just a change in what you're producing. It has nothing to do with economic growth. You're not making any more of anything. When your PPF curve goes out to the right, that's economic growth. And again, that can happen, the book talks about, because of a change in technology, a change in resources. Let's go back to our list. All right, explain what could lead to economic growth. We talked about that, and explain the difference in comparative advantage and absolute advantage. All right, talked about that. Explain how specialization trade can help move us beyond our PPF curve. Make sure you watch that video that I made earlier of problem number 7. I think I sent it out in announcements. It's just a video about the study session. All right, let me ask, does anyone have a question right now? Anybody want to send me an email or a chat about any problem they want to see worked out? Or any questions they have about either chapters 1 or 2? All right, chapters 3 and 4. Supply and demand and prices, free, controlled, and relative. These 2 chapters go hand in hand. In chapter 3, the biggest piece here is make sure you understand the law of demand. And I'll send out a review video also. But what I want to go over is in here. Make sure for the exam you understand. I'm going to try to get out to adaptive test prep, because for chapter 3 and 4, I think the best thing is to do adaptive test prep. Adaptive test prep is something that MindTap, our publisher, has created They are not, it's not like a test bank necessarily. I mean, you can Google test bank for this book if you want to. It is questions that are similar to the test bank questions. And what's great about it is at the end of each of them, or a lot of them, especially the ones where they're showing graphing, there's a video walkthrough. So I would come in here. The way to get to it is you come over into Mind tab. If you don't see it, you're going to press this button here that says More, and that's going to, yours might be on the back. You also have the option of using flashcards, FYI. Make sure for the exam, you know the difference between a change in demand and a change in quantity demanded. It's going to be on the exam. No point in missing it. You go Adaptive Test Prep. I'm going to create a new test. I'm going to come to, let's say, Chapter 3. I'm going to take 10 questions from Chapter 3. I think there's up to 30 questions. This is not something you do when you first start studying. That would be a waste of your time. It's something you do to review and get ready for the exam. But just coming out here and just saying, I'm going to start here, it's not going to help you retain any info. All right? As the price of pairs goes up, the demand for pairs goes down. The problem with this statement is the demand for pairs goes down because there's a difference between quantity demanded and demand. Demand only changes for a handful of reasons, which are right here. What causes the demand curve to shift? All right, that's going to be due to those things in the book. The book talks about them. It could be a change in the number of buyers. It could be a change in your wealth, a change in your income, a change in your taste and preferences. What makes you want to buy this? A change in your expectations, and a change in the price of other goods, whether those other goods are substitutes or complements. When the price of socks drops to a penny, people are probably going to buy more shoes. Not because they're going to have more money, FYI. It's because shoes and socks are complements to each other. Think about Xbox and Xbox games. If the price of an Xbox jumps to $10, makes sense, there's going to be a huge sale on Xbox games. Those two things are complements. They go together hand in hand. The other type of thing would be substitutes. If the price of Xbox goes down to $10, and let's assume the PlayStation is a perfect substitute for the Xbox, then the demand for PlayStations is going to go up or down. Price of Xboxes goes from $100, whatever, to $10. What happens to PlayStation demand? Well, if Xboxes are only $10 and people see them as perfect substitutes for each other, people are going to buy less Xboxes and buy more, buy less PlayStations and buy more Xboxes. So as the price of a substitute goes down, the demand for the substitute, perfect substitute, is going to go down also. People are going to move into the other market. And I'll send out a review for this one as well. All right, so here, the author of this statement implies that the demand and price are, nope, he's not saying that. That implies the price and demand are unrelated. No, uses the word demand when he should say quantity demanded. All right, that's your answer here. However, let's say I just said none of the above. Well, let me get the right answer. Implies that the price uses the word demand as opposed to quantity demanded. Quantity demanded only happens whenever there's a change in price. All right, on a supply and demand diagram, consider a price for which the horizontal distance to the demand curve is shorter than the horizontal distance to the supply curve. All right, on a supply and demand graph, consider a price for which the horizontal distance to the demand curve is shorter than the horizontal distance to the supply curve. All right, so what are they asking here? Come in here, let's draw a supply and demand curve. Make sure you put quantity down here and price up here. Here's my supply curve. Here's my demand curve. And they said at this price, a picture would have been better, a price for which the horizontal distance to the demand curve is shorter. All right, so I'm going to reach the demand curve first. All right, if I'm reaching the demand curve first, right, this is the demand curve. This is shorter. The horizontal distance of the demand curve is shorter than the horizontal distance of the supply curve. Is another way of saying I'm operating somewhere here above the equilibrium. Right? If the price here is above the equilibrium, what ends up happening is that if I took this price here, let's say it's $10, and I substitute it into the equation for this demand curve, and if me saying equation, et cetera, doesn't make sense to you, make sure you read chapter 2. There's a whole review. You also have the math and graphing piece. At a price of $10, the quantity, and this is the demand curve, demanded, is going to be less than the price here. This is the quantity supply curve. Right? If the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied, so let's put this contextually. Let's say I have 150 t-shirts, but people only want to buy 30 of the t-shirts. What's going to happen is there's going to be pressure. The market is out of equilibrium. There's going to be pressure on the market to lower the price. Right? This can happen as long as there's no price control, no price ceiling, price floor, etc. Right? End up lowering the price. So anything up here is considered a surplus. Any price above the equilibrium is a surplus. The price is too high. You're going to end up with more supply than quantity supplied than quantity demanded. Anything below the equilibrium here is going to be a shortage. All right. And I like to keep these to exactly 30 minutes. So let me go back here. Let me say, so know the difference between an inferior good, a neutral good, and a normal good. In order to know what an inferior or a normal good is, you'll have to know what happened to the income. When the income of a person increases and they buy more of a good, we consider that a normal good. When the income of a person increases and they buy less of that good, we consider that an inferior good. For example, when you make more money, you will buy less ramen noodles. Right? Ramen noodles would be considered an inferior good. When you make more money, you will buy less used tires. Used tires are considered a inferior good. When you make more money, at some point in your life, you will make more money and you will buy less domestic cars. You'll start buying foreign cars. You know, domestic cars are perfectly fine, but depending on what you do when your income goes up determines if it's normal or inferior. And this is very specific, right, to individual people. It's not like I can say ramen noodles are always an inferior good. It just means that for a certain person, when their income went up, they bought less ramen noodles. All right. For chapter 4, make sure you know the difference between a binding, and that's probably the hardest piece here, binding price floor, price ceiling. And the easiest way for students, I think, to kind of get it, right? There's something called price floor, price ceiling. When the government imposes a price floor or price ceiling, here's the supply curve. Here's the demand curve. Let's say that the going rate for an apartment in Houston is, let's say, $500. Students, and at $500, everybody in the class, and I think there are 20-something of us right now. How many people are in here now? There's 24 of us in here now. If there are 24 of us in here, at a price of $500, all 24 of us have an apartment. If the government comes in because students have said, hey, look, we're paying too much money in rent, we would prefer that you lower the amount of rent, put a price ceiling, make sure that they can't charge above a certain price, right? If they put that price ceiling here, let's say at $700, all right? So the government comes in and says, you cannot charge more than $700 on an apartment. This is considered non-binding. Right? The reason it's non-binding is nothing has changed. When the ceiling is above you, and above you at the equilibrium right here, right? When the ceiling is above the equilibrium rate, Nothing happens. The market is still going to clear here because it says you can't charge more than 700. Well, that's fine. I'm charging 500. You haven't changed anything about me, right? But when the government has a price ceiling that is below the equilibrium, let's say at 300 bucks, there's a problem here. Now the distance between the price, this to the supply curve is shorter than to the demand curve, and we're going to end up with a shortage. When we end up with a shortage, normally what would happen is people would start bidding the price up, but they can't bid the price up because there is a price control here. There is a binding price control. Right? The market is out of equilibrium. We're going to end up here with, instead of being selling 24, I'm going to end up with 20 units. That's a 20 units I'm going to be willing to supply. And however, we're going to have 30 people, and these numbers, the 20 and the 24 and 30, I'm just making up, right? Just know it has to be to the right of 24. We're going to end up with 30 people trying to fit into 20 apartments, right? This is an example of a price ceiling. A price floor, on the other hand, and notice how the ceiling, again, ceiling must be below the equilibrium to be effective. Oops, sorry. The price floor, I don't know what I did just there. I think I got the highlighter. Price floor, think of minimum wage as the easiest example. Here's the supply of people who are available to work. Here's the demand for number of jobs. Currently, minimum wage is $7.25. Some people will make the argument that if we create a price floor, a minimum amount, let's say they created a price floor of $10. If they create a price of $10 up here, you have to see where does this, and whenever I draw a straight line, that's usually just indicating whatever the price is, so I can easily see the pictures. If all 24 of you are working before, and here's quantity, and here is price. At a price of $10, we're going to end up with the demand for jobs. The person who's hiring is only going to want to hire 10 people. He doesn't have enough money to hire 24. But at the same time, this guy here, Mr. 25, he wasn't willing to work for $7.25. He is willing to work for $7.50, and et cetera, et cetera. You end up with more people. This is a consequence of this, looking for jobs. So at a price of $10, a lot of people came into the market, and so the supply of labor is going to be, let's say, 30. So we're going to have 30 people trying to fill 10 jobs, because here we have this surplus, not a surplus of jobs, a surplus of labor, right? Because the supply is the number of people who are working, right? This is a binding minimum wage. You have to pay a price that is above here, right? If it had been, let's say, here is supply curve, here's the demand curve, they intersect at $7.25. And if it had been $5, we would say this is not binding, because the price is still going to, market price is still going to clear here at the $7.25. This would be non-binding because it is below the equilibrium. Okay, guys, I'm running a little over. Did anyone have any questions or any problems they wanted to see? All right, that's it. That was the review for chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you have any questions, post them to the discussion board or email them to me. Make sure you get in and do the adaptive test prep questions. I can find them over here. I don't think I showed them all to you, but if you submit and review here, you can actually go back in on the ones you missed, and they'll have videos, etc., for you to watch, right? Which is extremely helpful. So it's like you've had somebody walking them through with you. Again, do not start with adaptive test prep, because if you just watch the videos and these questions and just kind of guess at them, you don't retain anything. All right, make sure you read the book. All right, any questions? All right, go ahead and let me see if I can do roll, see if I can capture everybody's name. And this is what I do. Anyone who is on the phone, if you are dialing in from a different number, that you normally use, just send that to me. All right. Be like, I was 713. If it's not the one that you used on your, what is it? On your survey. All right. Feel free to hop off. Bye.